My name is Upatissa. We live in extremely fortunate times to be born human beings and to have access to the teachings of the Buddha. Today, 26 centuries after the demise of Lord Buddha and his chief disciples, a small number of bhikkhus still aspire to practice the Eightfold Noble Path, having relinquished the material world. Bhante Candana is one of them, but his noble endeavors are unsustainable without our support. So, if you feel inspired by Bhante's teachings, please consider. A timely donation from the right places goes a long way to prolong the Buddha's dispensation. May the blessings of the Triple Gems be with you. Sukhi Hotu.
So you were just asking about the ideal position for a bhikkhu to have in relation to the prevalent notion that exists in people's minds about, or in reference to, a bhikkhu and the world. Does the bhikkhu engage with what's going on in the world, the problems taking place in the world, the injustices taking place in the world, the wrong things, etc.? Does the bhikkhu have a position, a voice, especially in the context of people needing, coming to a bhikkhu in need of some clarity? If we go by that premise, then absolutely. Plus, the bhikkhu does have, to my understanding, a responsibility to the truth, to the Dhamma. Now, of course, some people have been using this statement by Lord Buddha where he says, I am not against the world, but the world has been against me. This is in the context of the false accusations that certain sects had been placing against him, both the Brahmins, and especially in the case of Jainism and Nigantanata Buddha's followers and others, simply because he was stating the truth. He stood for something. He challenged the status quo. Otherwise, how would they know about Lord Buddha? How would they even be against him if they have not seen Lord Buddha stating something, living according to something higher, based on truth, found on the foundation of truth? What is right versus what is wrong. And that is something that I have unfortunately been witnessing in these placating, laissez-faire attitude carrying modern day bhikkhus. Theravadan. So long as the fire is not over here, it's not burning in this side of the fence, I'm fine. So long as I'm getting my support, so long as the king or the government or the supporters are taking care of me and giving me titles and giving me all that I need, I'll follow the narrative that they throw in my direction, and what is expected of me I will do. And you might be in a Buddhist country for all intents and purposes on the surface, and you might convince yourself that you are doing the right thing. And if anyone does stand up, and if anyone does challenge the narrative, of the majority. Challenges by asking questions, that is. You're not marching down the streets, you're not, because there have also been cases where bhikkhus were, becoming aggressive physically, saying harsh words. Well, I'm sorry, we have a problem. Kamma. The problem of kamma, action. Whether by thought, Lord Buddha says, whether by speech, verbal action, or physical, bodily action. Kamma. Now I'm addressing the other side, of course, if you noticed. So there is a balance. This is a majjhima pada. This is not to be taken lightly. So all those people who make references to that one saying of Lord Buddha's and use it out of context to defend their position, their lame position, their indifferent position, which is not based on metta, which is not based on the Dhamma, the good, beautiful, lovely Dhamma, the truthful Dhamma. It is based on what's in it for them. They don't want to rattle the boat. They don't want to, shake up the homeostasis that's going on. In the field of therapy, homeostasis also, in the systemic therapy specifically, it came to be back in the day when therapy was therapy, I would say, in the hands of knowledgeable therapists like Carl Whitaker, for example, in the Western Minuchin also. They would intentionally address these matters. Because what a patient does when a person, there's a term called IP, or identified patient, that's like a professional term, especially in note-taking and in writing in charts, etc., as to who the individual was that was first brought in to attend sessions, to be seen by a therapist. That person. And usually it is the person who cannot handle the fakeness of society. In this case, the fakeness, the imbalances, the lies, the falsities of what is being pretended to be the case. Meanwhile, there's so much turmoil and chaos in the family. So that particular person, emotionally, psychologically, socially perhaps even, is unable to keep their mouth shut. So they have to say something, they have to behave. But the rest of the family wants to keep it in the hush-hush department. They don't want to address this. They want to, brush it under the carpet, sweep it under the carpet. So that person becomes, like, in biblical terms, the scapegoat. Where in ancient biblical times, what they would do is they would, from what I recall, they would throw, quote unquote, all their inequities, all their immoral, unethical, non-virtuous behaviors, sins, in other words, in biblical terms. They would throw these sins, so-called sins, onto this poor goat, and they would release the goat outside of the palace or the city gates. In the Middle East, I think they would have that. Probably it's still on in some places in the Middle East or that part of the world, but essentially all the blame goes onto that person, and the therapist would be the one who has to fix, and they actually would say, could you please fix him? Could you please fix her? She's the one that's all broken. We're fine here. That person, in essence, has created a schism, or has created a shake-up of the homeostasis. So he created an imbalance. So it's no longer homeostatically sound, if you will. And they say, fix him or fix her so that we can get our lives back together. What is that? That means the messed up, the completely non-functional, and definitely unhealthy environment. We need that back. The environment, the same environment that this person, in a sense, rebelled against. The IP, or the individual patient, or identified patient, right? So similarly, we have it here. Lord Buddha had this mechanism already in place. People don't, I mean, that's why it's funny, because the newest thing, the most novel technique that modern psychotherapists or therapy in general comes up with, it's already there. It's much more sophisticated, in fact. You don't need peer-reviewed papers, so-called, that legitimize things like that, because it's so powerful. It's so effective. And it is so straightforward, which is not what we get. So a bhikkhu is supposed to be the epitome of straightforwardness. Clarity. You use the word clarity. You asked me, that's the role that people look, they see that role of a bhikkhu and they expect some clarity, honesty. Unfortunately, that is not the case when you look into the world and see what's really going on. However, that is not how it's supposed to be when you look at the suttas, the discourses, the lives of the bhikkhus. That's not what the Sangha is about. That's not what the sasana is about, the dispensation of Lord Buddha, the tradition as such. The practice. When I say sasana, to me it's not the tradition, the rites and rituals. That's meaningless ultimately. That doesn't get you to experience relief from suffering. The practice does, but the practice must be solidly based upon the foundation of truth, clarity. You need to understand what's going on around you. Look at a basic, simple problem, a math problem on a blackboard or a whiteboard in the classroom. The student, in order for them to proceed to solve the problem, the equation, let's say, they need to first understand the problem. They need to know what each of these symbols represent. What we have today are all convoluted symbols with convoluted definitions, where people are mangling. Lord Buddha, I just retranslated from the book of the Twos in the Anguttara Nikaya, one of the suttas. It's from the book of the Twos in the 21 to 31 sutta section. I believe it was sutta number 27. I'm not sure, 26, 27, maybe 25 or 28. One of those, where Lord Buddha says how individuals in the future, or even at the time that he was alive, would convolute, distort what Lord Buddha has said. They will take what Lord Buddha said, in fact, and claim that he never said it. Or they will say that he said something which he never did. Now, why would people do that? Because we are fickle. We are suckers for prestige. We are suckers for, attention. And if somebody has found attention, is finding themselves in a prestigious position, and yes, being a teacher, and that's another reason why so many people nowadays, lay people, as well as monastics, they seem to be fascinated with becoming a teacher, which is the next celebrity status, I think. Everybody wants to become like, what's that guy's name? Tony Robbins or somebody of that, they want to become famous because of, everybody has their own channels. Everybody's throwing in their sound bites these days without working on themselves, which brings us to the main crux of the matter. When there is no practice in the life of the bhikkhu, then there is distortion of the Dhamma, plain and simple. Then you are not in it for the right reasons. You are in it for prestige. Yes, some lay people who are so idealistic, who are so full of trust, I would say, which is a noble thing in essence. They have such a hard time believing that. I've seen this to my amazement. I've witnessed this around the world. Whichever continent I found myself in, I saw this, and I would, when the questions would come up, and I would ask questions to kind of elaborate, to allow the person who asked the original question to look around them and to see if this has really been taking place in the lives of these individuals whom they call leaders of a temple, etc., etc. And they would have this surprised look and the acknowledgement, of course, but also a surprise, but they are supposed to be pure. That's usually a response I get, which is almost like a call, a beseeching of, it's a sense of betrayal that they're experiencing. If I'm supporting this bhikkhu, if I'm supporting this temple, if I'm supporting this monastery, it happened to me once, also when I was in Europe, and I found myself in this temple temporarily because this was a few years ago when I had just gone forth, and I was trying to find a shelter for me to practice. And I was going from country to country, just any place where I could. And this was in the middle of COVID, and so many places used the COVID thing as a cover for not wanting to have, I guess, a person like me be there. But I relate this story because there was this Sri Lankan family. They came, and when the other local monks were not present, they started, one of them was quite distraught, and they were almost in tears, and they said, "But how come we don't get to hear Dhamma like this?" And it hurt me so deeply. Here I am, a newly ordained bhikkhu, only for a few months, and a layperson, upasaka and upasika, are asking me a question. And I just lifted my shoulders with my hands, like empty, and I said, "I'm sorry, but I don't know how to answer that. But I'm here. You're asking questions, so I will do my best." And they said, "Well, how come our own, Teras and Bhantes and Ajahns, they don't talk about these things. I didn't know about this sutta. I didn't know about that thing that happened. We never hear about this. What we hear about are the Ratana Sutta, Mangala Sutta, and the Metta Sutta, Metta Karaniya Sutta." Lord Buddha had something to say about that as well. Because the suttas that are deep, the suttas that are very pertinent to understand the truth of yourself, society, the world, etc., to really go deep within you, they will be neglected And what will be pushed down people's ears and minds will be that kind of, or those kinds of suttas that are, not so deep, and something that generates financial, etc., etc., for the temple, for the bhikkhu. And that's also a sad thing. So it minimizes the role. But when it comes to bigger issues like the world situation and what do you think, Bhante, about this? What do you think, Ajahn? What do you think, Sayadaw, about this matter? You have individuals today who have such tremendous support. When you look and dig and try to see what are they really saying, at the most you're hearing them say that this path is all about doing good deeds. Lord Buddha never said don't do good deeds. If you know anything about kusala and akusala, if you know anything about kamma, that's quite a redundant, stupidly redundant statement to be making, that, oh yes, we're going to do good deeds. Yeah, and there isn't any. There isn't. This has been happening especially in nowadays in Burma and Myanmar, and some individuals especially, because they want to become popular, and they have become quite popular. And they call this engaged Buddhism. This is another coinage, the new labeling. You see this also in the West, of course. Oh, these are the modern, engaged, humanistic Buddhism. When was the Buddhism as taught by Lord Buddha, when was the Dhamma not humanistic? When was it not? These people don't have answers to this, but it sounds good. It's a catchy phrase, and you throw in some famous Hollywood stars or some very famous people, or all of a sudden behind it, and you become the next big thing. But what are you doing really as far as the Dhamma is concerned, as far as clarity is concerned? Are you simply camouflaging what's happening with the world? You have to be able to speak and say and have a voice that often, if you're speaking the truth, it will sound different than what the world is saying. This is a proper way of understanding earlier what I was mentioning about people misinterpreting Lord Buddha's statement about him not being against the world in a certain context. So they're using that. So they're going in cahoots with the current narrative. No, you have to be able to have a different voice. If, not for the sake of simply having a voice, mind you, that would be completely akusala. We're not here to create disruptions of harmony, but when there is disharmony, when there is chaos, when you're speaking against it for the sake of harmony, that will sound chaotic for those people who are advocates of chaos. I mean, any person with some common sense will understand that. But then why are they not speaking out loud? Because I get this question, oftentimes, people, Bhante, you're very outspoken. Bhante, we never hear any bhikkhu or anyone speak about these issues. Sometimes they're lovely messages or in support, and some are like, how dare you, how dare you? Even some bhikkhus and ajahns, etc. And these individuals, need to look at the suttas. They haven't. We need to stop worshipping the roles we occupy and really question as to why. we took on the robes. It's the purer life. It's the higher life, Lord Buddha calls it, compared to the lower life that we lived as householders. It must represent something. It's not an extension of it, where now you have a little bit more of status, a little bit more of a prestige, maybe a lot more actually. Many of these bhikkhus, if they were disrobed, they really would not be able to even be a college professor, you know? What are they going to fall back on? Shoe salesmen? Writers? So they fall back on the status quo. They placate. They just are very agreeable with what's happening. So long as, it's very sad. And in other enterprises, in human enterprises, you see this. And as a person who comes from the Christian tradition, as a child, I grew up in that, and I'm glad to say I even had my taste of the Christian monastic arena, where I lived in seminary, I lived in a monastery, I was dedicating day and night my life to learning everything I could. But then I would see the discrepancies, I would see how it was not the pure lifestyle that I saw Christ to have had. What inspired me about that? I wasn't seeing it. The relinquishing of assets, having little, it was in fact the opposite. People were wearing gold crosses around their neck. People were carrying more and more fancier ruby crusted canes, rings, huge emeralds, different colored robes depending on your status, bigger and bigger churches, of course, if you were somebody big, meeting with government officials. And then I would pull back several decades later, after I walked away from that faith entirely. And I was seeing the same thing. The robe colors would be different. They wouldn't have beards, but they would have shaven heads, some of them. But the essence of seeking the world and the values of the world versus the Dhamma, to live by the Dhamma, the same principles of seeking what is adhamma was very and is very much present today. But to not ruffle the boat, not to shake up the establishment, most, if not all, will not speak about this or on this matter. Meanwhile, every lay person, every person who has integrity, attending these temples, if they still are, and most of them, by the way, are attending because either they don't know, they're absolute 100% newbies, meaning they're coming from a different tradition other than Buddhist, so they're mesmerized, they want to try out, it's so exotic for them, so ethnic. And the other group is doing it because they feel guilty if they don't, because it's tradition, family, culture. And if they are in a foreign land and they have a temple, that has become their own small island of their home country. And there's no Dhamma there. It's very cultural. So they're there to feel at home with those people who are like them, who come from the same, probably speak the same language. I've seen this around the world. So what are they really there for? That's not Dhamma. Culture can never be Dhamma. Culture does not teach you the role or of the pain of suffering, of having suffering in your heart. it will not bring you face to face to acknowledge and understand that. Culture is not going to give you that. If anything, it will muffle it. If anything, it will put a band-aid on it, make it temporarily disappear while you're there. That's not Dhamma. But there are people who are looking for the Dhamma. And this is why I am addressing this question, which you asked, because it does come up, because it's surprising and it's refreshing, the way the responses I've been getting also from people, that to hear that, they didn't know that they can speak up because their religious leaders, shall we say, we're just telling them, guiding them to just, fall in line. Do exactly what they're told. That's not, I don't see any evidence of that in the suttas. None. There's this rebelliousness in the role of the persona, the presence of Lord Buddha. Not just him, of course. All his Arya, Savakas, all his disciples. There's a nobility, there's an integrity which comes. You cannot have integrity, you cannot have nobility in the absence of honesty. You cannot have truth be missing in your life's, in your CV, basically, in your spiritual CV, or even as a character, as a person in life. You won't find yourself in a healthy relationship ever. Nobody will love you. You can't even perform well at your job if you don't show some level of understanding and appreciating and acting, behaving, committing actions based on that very important aspect of human relations, which is truth, honesty. You're unreliable otherwise. How could you make a sale? You have to be honest, at least to your boss, at least with your numbers, even though you might be, if you're a salesperson, let's say if you're over-exaggerating the price of this, or the worth of this, but you're getting it sold and you're making yourself and others money, you still have to be honest as to how much it was. Otherwise, you're going to get in trouble. So even on such a mundane, superficial, banal level, honesty still reigns supreme. But why shouldn't it reign supreme in the Sangha? Why? Temples are not there to create fundraisers. Let's say a few days ago, or we just started last week, the official Chinese New Year, the Lunar Year, New Year. People around the world, especially in certain areas, they also treat that, temples and whatnot, they treat that as a time for the temples to really go crazy with their fundraisers. Because they have convinced the public that this is the time for you to be making offerings. The time. Well, that goes against the Dhamma, by the way. That's a lie. That's an absolute hoax. That's an absolute sales tactic, which no temple is supposed to be engaged in. It's a sales pitch. It's one that has been working, by the way, for over 1,000 years, if not more. Okay? But people, because they trust the monk, they trust this person in robes, they trust. And plus, they see somebody's name over there who's donated $1,000, and they were thinking of giving $500, and they know them in the community, and the person's name is there now, it's also written on the board, and yours is going to be second with $500? Well, at least if I give 1,000, it's going to be in the same line. Okay, so what is happening there? This is not, I'm not creating a grotesque image of something that is not there. I am stating a fact. And anybody who's ever been to any temple, any fundraiser, knows what I'm talking about to be absolutely 100% accurate. Sadly. What is that? So we have to, yes, we are not going against the world. We're not marching on the streets. We're not trying to topple people and things. No, that's not our job. We are individuals who have gone forth, but we also survive by the generosity of supporters. I cannot possibly and will not possibly be able to do and have not been able to do any of the things that I still continue on doing, although with much struggle and difficulties. However, I nevertheless am able to do those things thanks to the supporters. Yes, I don't have the shelter of a monastery, as I was saying earlier, even though I'm a bhikkhu in this world. You live in a place in a world where individual supporters have been key in helping me do the work I do. And if I will be able to do that in the future, it will be thanks to individuals' support. Who? Lay people, primarily. But lay people need, it's a necessity, not just lay people, of course, but anyone, but especially because they are looking up to us. The leaders of the faith, as they would call it in other traditions, but we are in a position where we are expected to live with a higher level of integrity. We have to live with a higher level of virtue, sila, than others, than the person who is bowing down to me as a bhikkhu. It's highly inappropriate for me to sit there having not so spotless virtue in my character than the person who's bowing down to me. That is unacceptable, the way I see it. How my thoughts are, the quality of my speech, the quality of my actions. I need to be living truthfully as a bhikkhu. These are not just words, they need to be demonstrated. Because out of the generosity of the person who's bowing down, who's giving you support, especially on the Chinese New Year, or any time, I can't tell them, hey, now is the time for you to go ahead. Yeah, this is the time for you to really show your support, because the rewards will be even more enormous. Nonsense. That's a ploy. That's a sales pitch. That's a lie. For the sake of what? So that I can build a new wing on that part of the temple, which nobody gets to use? Other than put a box there, donation box, and maybe a statue that I can import, and then we can get ceremonies and rituals and chanting so people could donate more. These are facts. These are not grotesquely, these are unfortunate facts, which I'm seeing everywhere. So, and that's why I stopped, even accepting invitations to go to so-called centers and temples, because of so much adhamma going on. They're inviting this, that type of person. Yeah, they're all monastics. We all accept all of them. Okay, that's noble, I guess, that, tolerance. But what are they saying? If they're saying things that are adhamma, I'm sorry, the door is shut for those. And if you're not going to shut your door to Adhamma, I will shut it for me. I will not attend. I will not go. Because whatever we say has to be truth-based, not according to the whims of the trends of society, whatever is appealing, whatever is accepted by today's society. I think these should be quite acceptable and anticipated, expected from all of us, by all. Unfortunately, we're living in such a decrepit and difficult time where the Dhamma is really becoming suffocated day by day. I just never thought that it would happen in my own lifetime. I thought maybe 100 years later. But that's not the case, the way I'm seeing it. And the world in its unethical, immoral, and untruthful, dishonest way of doing it is no longer just a world. They've penetrated into the temples. Sadly. But anyhow, the Dhamma is always there, but the teachings are disappearing. So I bring it back down to not being pulled into the black hole of the world as such, but when the time comes, when the moment is there, when someone asks you, please do not lie. Please don't be delusional. Don't shoot for the narrative. Don't push for that agenda, that narrative, when you know better. And if you don't know better, go and find out what is go back to Buddhism 101. Go back to the basics. And if you're really in doubt, ask yourself, what would Lord Buddha do in this situation? Would he just say, yeah, gulp down whatever the TV is saying, whatever the news is saying, yeah, believe them, and then start fighting other people online or somewhere else with that thing that you just took for absolute 100% undeniable truth? Why? Because the Dalai Lama or somebody else is saying it, or they just say, yeah, sure. No, you have your own brain, use it. You have your own common sense, use it. You can only breathe through your nose, I tell people. Your own breathing. You cannot breathe for somebody else. You cannot think for someone else, and you can definitely expect there not to be any liberation through somebody else. You're the only one who's going to do it. And you're definitely not going to be able to even come close without having integrity, without having truthfulness, which means there's going to be clashes with the worldview outside versus the Dhamma. So my encouragement is for you to stand strong on your principles, which are not abnormally difficult or otherworldly or abstractions or something that is open to interpretation, like this whole nonsense with ethical, fluidity, moral relativism or something. Nonsense. That's a criminal way of thinking. That's actually, they should put these people away, whoever advocates for that. No. Truth is truth, whichever way you look at it. And if something hurts you, I guarantee it also hurts others. And this is very clearly stated by Lord Buddha. What is kusala? People who always wondered, what is kusala? What is skillful action, wholesome action? Good, merit-making action. What is it? Well, something that What happens when you do it? When you're doing it, I mean, there's many ways of going and looking at the different layers of this. However, one very simple way of looking at it is, if this is going to hurt you, it's also going to hurt me. So do not do unto somebody else what you don't want others to do to you, which later on, 500 years, 600 years later, we saw also in Christianity. This teaching, I mean. And do to others things that you like to be done to you, and the results of which you can expect now to be good, first and foremost. Lord Buddha even addresses those individuals who don't believe in karma or rebirth. He says, even now, there's several benefits to it. In the Anguttara Nikaya, I think it was in the Book of the Fours, where Lord Buddha lists the benefits of doing good, and conversely, doing bad as well. The disadvantages and the harmful effects of that, akusala or unskillful action. So we can just fall back on those and use those as a guideline. And stop thinking about things as if we are not being affected. Or we can only look at it, it's very individualistically. No. My opinion matters if the person thinks like that. My attitude matters. We need to push that. Okay, what comes after that? Attitude, okay, where's the root of that? My honesty matters. My level of honesty. So this comes back to right effort from the Noble Eightfold Path. If you're a parent and you're expecting your child not to be lying, not to speak falsehood, but in your conversation over the phone, your child hears you talking with somebody and lying, well, there's a problem. Your intentions might be good, your sankappa might be good. My child should not be lying. Yeah, but how are you going about doing that, demonstrating that? How's the right effort there going? There's no right effort. So we need to be definitely beacons of truth, if you will, but symbols of clarity. Not just a symbol, living examples of clarity. And if we are living the homeless life, stop building bigger and bigger monasteries that you treat as big villas. Stop acting like Kublai Khan when you're simply supposed to be a monk, a bhikkhu. Stop with this nonsense with titles and getting titles and accepting. Throw them away. Deny that. You just reject that in a nice way. But don't walk around with titles and things. That's nonsense. This is all ego. And has no place in the Dhamma. And has no place in the Sangha. Whatever doesn't belong in the Dhamma does not belong in the Sangha. There's the Tisarana, the 3 refuges. What is that? People need to revisit. Is it Buddhang saranang gacchami, Dhammang saranang gacchami, Sanghang saranang gacchami, or Lobhang saranang gacchami, Dosang saranang gacchami, Mohang saranang gacchami? Am I taking refuge in greed and lust and passions? Am I taking refuge in anger and hatred, resentment? If you don't agree with me? Or am I taking refuge in delusion, ignorance, indifference? So this path is about being active when necessary, and it's when you look at aditana, when you look at appamada, the heedfulness, the diligence, the vigilance, the attitude of maintaining your course. When Lord Buddha sat under the Bodhi tree, he had to show his weaker side that he could do this. He had to muster up all the energy he had, all the power he had, all the willingness, willfulness, intensity to do it. We become bhikkhus, to my understanding, to my reasoning, and based on the Dhamma, based on what I have read and studied for decades now. We become bhikkhus because the result is quite the result of the path, the patipada, the holy path, the holy life. The result of it, the outcome of it is extraordinary. But our efforts must also be equally extraordinary. Our hearts must be pure, because what we are, if we are bhikkhus for the right reason, and that is, there are no right reasons, mind you. It's singular. The ending of suffering, which is pure, which is truth. So if each bhikkhu approaches it like that, each monastic approaches it like that, each layperson approaches it like that, then we will have truly a wondrous world. And that's what a truly dedicated bhikkhu becomes a beacon of clarity, to my understanding, and really lives a life that is worthy of respect and honor and veneration, as Lord Buddha says, because they are now a living embodiment of the three trainings. They represent Lord Buddha, they represent the Dhamma, they represent the noble Sangha. And that's what we need in the world to save the sasana from dying. Not cultural stuff. That will in fact, that is the thing which is suffocating it. Today, the Thai Buddhist is thinking only in terms of Thai Buddhism. The Sri Lankan is thinking only in the terms of Sri Lankan or Sinhalese Buddhism. The Tibetan is thinking the same thing. The Vietnamese is thinking the same thing. The Chinese is thinking the same. The Korean is thinking the same thing. Nowadays, whatever. Westerners. Everybody's thinking about themselves, and nobody's thinking about the Dhamma. Culture is not going to save us. It is breaking us. Dhamma is beyond any such things. And we need to be advocates of the Dhamma in a dark age that we are living in.